questions.
Buy this car. 9,700 will do. Just please don't ask any questions. Her fractured scream shredded the viscous, suffocating air of the morning. It was accompanied by a piercing clatter as a cluster of keys, bearing the gleaming golden crest of Porsche, was hurled violently, skidding through across the grimy glass counter of my pawnshop. It was 9 in the morning. The unforgiving, blazing sun beat down, reflecting blindingly off the hood of the Porsche 911 GT3 RS that had just braked, scorching rubber right outside my door. The girl stood there, her chest heaving violently within the confines of a pitch-black, skin-tight, genuine leather racing suit. The glossy hide was drenched in sweat, clinging ruthlessly to her flesh, transforming what should have been a glorious garment of the speedways into a suffocating husk. Her eyes were wide, feral, brimming with the primal terror of someone who had just watched the scythe of the Grim Reaper graze her throat. You'd think, faced with a $500,000 windfall dropping from the heavens, a ragged pawnbroker would eagerly snatch those keys? No. I stared at her with the most deafening silence, leisurely picked up the expensive cluster of keys, savored the chill of the metal for a few fleeting seconds, and let go, throwing them straight into the rusted iron trash bin beneath the counter. What the hell does 10 grand matter when the luxurious machine out there is, in reality, a mobile coffin being tracked straight to the headquarters of the DEA's Major Crimes Unit? Hello, I'm Silas. Have you ever, in your entire life, been stabbed in the back by someone sharing your own blood, shoved to the absolute brink of hell just out of sheer greed? Leave a yes or no in the comments below so I can gauge just how thoroughly rotten the world out there truly is. But for now, sit tight, because I am about to tell you how I commandeered this luxurious coffin and dug a grave for the perpetrator. 9:15 in the morning. The outside temperature had already breached the threshold of endurance for those accustomed to air-conditioned sanctuaries. The air in this city during midsummer never possessed a shred of clarity. It was perpetually sluggish, dense with humidity, and choked with the exhaust of tens of thousands of internal combustion engines groaning across the avenues. From the dim, moldy corner of my pawnshop, reeking of rotting wood and rusted metal, I slowly observed the destructive presence that had just swept through my glass door. The Porsche 911 GT3 RS, parked haphazardly on the sidewalk, was still. The flat sax boxer engine growled in deep, rhythmic pulsations, violently vibrating an atmosphere that was already stifling. The searing heat, radiating from the cooling vents and the carbon fiber hood, spiraled upward in lazy waves, distorting the blinding sunbeams that hammered the asphalt. Yet the entity emitting the most ferocious heat, the one truly scorching the senses at this moment, was not that $500,000 mechanical beast, but the woman staggering before me, Evelyn. A name typically tethered to the covers of prestigious magazines, elite tea parties, or the dazzling champagne-soaked podiums of F1 tracks. Today, however, that angel of velocity was drowning within her own proud armor. She wore a one-piece racing jumpsuit forged from full-grain leather, pitch black, clinging mercilessly from her ankles right up to her Adam's apple. Under the naked, brutal daylight spilling through the front door, the attire laid bare a pathetic sense of displacement. Real leather, which inherently requires the frigid chill of midnight street races to breathe, was now shrinking beneath the 95-degree heat, constricting every millimeter of her body with ruthless intent. The cold alloy zipper, running from her collar down to her waist, had been yanked open in a desperate bid for air, exposing the flushed, oxygen-starved skin of her upper chest. The lethal allure of her hourglass figure remained undeniably present. The glossy, skin-tight leather squeezed her impossibly narrow waist, writhing to embrace the sharp flare of her hips and the robust curve of her backside, producing dry, rustling friction with every terrified shift of her weight. But I did not look at her with the ravenous eyes of a lustful man. Through the lens of a fixer, I saw only a young beast being boiled alive inside a glass cage. Drenched in sweat that streamed down her temples, her chestnut curls were plastered against cheeks so deathly pale they lacked a single drop of blood. The exorbitant Tom Ford perfume, a heavy scent of black orchid and oud wood, was completely overpowered by the sour stench of sweat, the acrid odor of baking leather, and the palpable reek of sheer unadulterated terror violently assaulting my olfaction. She bit down on her lower lip until it ruptured. A streak of vivid red blood seeped out, blending with her smudged lipstick to forge a hauntingly dilapidated visage. Her gaze could not focus. Her pupils darted frantically, continuously sweeping the sun-dazzled street outside, as if behind that hazy curtain of heat lay a pack of rabid hounds bearing their fangs in wait. She didn't need a handful of loose cash. She had brought this car to my squalid corner of the world simply to beg for an evaporation, a complete obliteration of her own existence from the face of the earth. I hoisted my heavy frame from the torn leather chair, slipping past the glass counter. The steel toes of my boots struck the plywood floor with slow, rhythmic creaks. Every step I took seemed to squeeze Evelyn's ragged breathing just a fraction tighter. "My shop pawns goods. We don't purchase homicides, miss," I rumbled, a flat, emotionless timbre sharpened by decades of cleaning up the toxic refuse of the upper echelon. I didn't look at her again. I walked straight out the door, advancing toward the metallic beast growling beneath the sun. The sunlight lashed fiercely against my skin. As I neared the Porsche, a blast of scorching air from the asphalt struck my face, carrying a chaotic medley of odors. The acrid stench of scorched rubber violently frictioned against the road, the suffocating reek of motor oil. But deep beneath that static of olfactory noise, the instincts of a demon who had long dwelled in the underworld abruptly awakened. I froze at the rear of the vehicle. I dropped to one knee, indifferent to the boiling asphalt searing through the rough denim of my jeans. Tilting my head, I brought my nose close to the dual titanium exhaust pipes, which were trembling violently. It wasn't the usual smell of exhaust. Mingled with the combusting premium octane was a cloyingly sweet, pungent, and sickly residue, like burnt almonds mixed with chlorine, the unmistakable signature of a chemical compound being subjected to extreme thermal stress. The scent of pure fentanyl. Damn it. I thrust my hand, its calloused, iron-dusted fingers, deep into the dark, stifling void between the carbon undercarriage shield and the muffler. The radiant heat of the metal baked the skin of my hand, but I didn't pull back. My fingers traced the mechanical contours. Contact. A thick, heat-resistant plastic wrapping, brutally stuffed and wedged tight into the cavity above the radiator assembly. The mass was at least 2 kilograms. More than enough to send whoever sat behind the steering wheel straight to federal prison until their flesh rotted away to white bone. But the grandmaster behind this chessboard had no intention of stopping there. I withdrew my hand from that lethal parcel, sliding my fingertips along the edge of the aluminum alloy chassis. An unnatural contour met my touch, a rectangular block half the size of a cigarette pack, cold to the touch, locked firmly in place by a heavy-duty industrial magnet. Its textured surface starkly contrasted the smooth finish of the frame. I pried at it gently with a fingernail. A minuscule red LED light blinked slowly, rhythmically in the darkness of the undercarriage, much like the heartbeat of a demon lying in ambush. A military-grade GPS tracker, a specialized dual-encrypted device utilized only by the armed forces or federal major crimes units. I stood up straight, pulling a crumpled handkerchief from my pocket to wipe away the sweat and black soot staining my hands. The tempo of the world around me seemed to decelerate. The roar of traffic on the avenue faded into the void. Everything became horrifyingly sharp and lucid. The curtain had just risen on a blood-soaked theater, exposing its ruthless malice under the unforgiving sun. I walked back into the shop. Evelyn had retreated entirely into the darkest corner, her arms, clad in black leather, wrapping tightly around her violently heaving chest. Her body trembled as if she were on the verge of collapsing. The suffocating heat of the room, married to the viscous silence, was enough to drive a person to madness. "Beneath the undercarriage of your car, 2 kilograms of fentanyl are slowly roasting," I stated, shattering the silence with a razor-sharp tone entirely devoid of mercy. Evelyn flinched, her eyes widening to their absolute limits. A flash of stubborn denial sparked, only to be instantly extinguished by sheer horror. She opened her mouth to speak, but her throat was bone-dry. "Don't feign surprise," I advanced, planting both hands on the glass counter, bearing down on her with the full weight of the truth. 2 kilos of fentanyl isn't something a mechanic accidentally slips in during an oil change. But that isn't even the worst part. The worst part is that right next to that brick of narcotics is a satellite tracker, actively transmitting your coordinates on a 10-second loop. And I'd wager this entire shop that the signal is feeding straight into the DEA's servers. Evelyn's legs turned to jelly. She swayed, her thighs and hips dragging against the wooden shelves, drawing out a desperate screech from the leather before she crumpled onto the rotting stool. Her hands flew up to cover her face, fingers digging into her tangled hair. A sob broke free, heavily pressed within her chest, choked, agonizing. "It's him. It has to be him," she whispered, her voice fracturing like shards of glass, raining down on a stone floor. "Julian, my half-brother." I nodded slowly, extracting a cheap pack of cigarettes from a drawer and striking a flame. The spark flared, smoke plumed, spiraling lazily through the beams of light slashing across the doorframe. The pungent odor of tobacco filled the space, somewhat masking the stench of her panic. The death of an empire always begins with the vultures dividing the spoils. I took a long, deep drag. "Your billionaire father is lying in an ICU waiting to be taken off life support, correct? And if you get busted with enough dope to catch a life sentence without parole, the morality clause in the will automatically crosses out your name. The entire trust, the shares and the family dynasty will legally and gracefully fall right into the lap of your dutiful little brother." Evelyn looked up at me. Her tear-filled eyes reflected the utter despair of a bird trapped inside a cage of barbed wire that was slowly shrinking. She had once dominated racetracks at 200 miles an hour. She could navigate dead man's curves, yet she was entirely blind to the pitch-black detours of human malice. "What do I do?" she shrieked, a sound of total loss of control. The breasts compressed within the leather jumpsuit shuddered violently. "I just drove that car halfway across the city. He called me early this morning, claimed the car's electrical system was throwing errors, and told me to drive it to his garage across town so he could check it. I believed him. He deliberately dictated my route. The police are coming here, aren't they? They're going to raid this place, slap cuffs on me, and my life is over." She shot up, her leather boots slamming against the floor. Panic had triggered her fight-or-flight response. "I have to go. I have to leave the car, catch a cab, run. I can't let them catch me here. Sit down." I roared, a deep, guttural command harboring an overwhelming destructive force that reverberated off the exposed brick walls. That frigid interdiction struck her like an invisible backhand, halting Evelyn in her tracks and sending her crashing back down onto the stool. I walked around the counter, closing the distance between us. My massive shadow fell over her, swallowing the last fragile sliver of light illuminating the racer's ruined face. The scent of tobacco, mixed with the rugged musk of a hardened man, breathed into the cramped space separating us. "Use that melting brain of yours and think," I whispered, parsing out every syllable slowly, as sharp as a straight razor. "If you run now, you become a sewer rat with a nationwide warrant. Traffic cameras have already captured you clutching the steering wheel of that Porsche, cruising across the city for the past hour. You escape today, and tomorrow your face will plaster every Interpol red notice. Running away is literally hammering the final nail into the coffin your brother built for you." Evelyn held her breath, the tight leather around her neck strained tightly with every dry swallow. "So you want me to sit here and wait for them to put the cuffs on me?" "No," I smirked, a smile that my former clientele among the ultra-rich used to shudder at. It was the smile that signaled the genesis of utter devastation. Killers motivated by money are usually hasty, clumsy, but killers motivated by envy, by the need to usurp and validate themselves. They are pathological narcissists. Your brother doesn't just want to throw you in a cell. He designed a flawless trap as intricate as an art performance, timed perfectly in broad daylight to drag your honor through the mud in front of the media. And the DEA are merely the guests of honor he invited to the show. I leaned down, locking my gaze onto Evelyn's violently trembling eyes. When dealing with a narcissist, never play defense. Give him a grander, more spectacular stage. Let him confidently step into the spotlight, and then watch him slip his own neck into the noose. The invisible noose hadn't even finished tightening before. From the distant horizon of the avenue, a sound began to shred the sweltering air, hammering an oppressive rhythm against our chests. Sirens. Initially, it was just a faint, wailing thread hiding behind the engine noise of passing traffic, but within seconds, it amplified into a cacophony of ear-splitting shrieks, crisscrossing like a pack of starving wolves catching the scent of blood. The sirens of the DEA's Major Crimes Unit didn't sound like ordinary patrol cars. They shrieked in urgent, aggressive bursts, mercilessly clawing at the eardrums. Evelyn violently flinched. The entirety of her musculature beneath that pitch-black, genuine leather spasmed in a paroxysm of absolute panic. The dry, creaking friction of the expensive leather rubbing against itself echoed starkly in the cramped room, sounding eerily like bones being ground to dust. She stumbled backward, her back slamming hard against a steel shelf cluttered with moss-covered antique radios. Her chest heaved frantically, desperately trying to suck in the room's meager, stale oxygen to no avail. The cold sweat seeping from her pores thickened, overpowering the expensive perfume, melding with the blistering heat to form an invisible pressure crushing her ribcage. They're here. She stammered, her wide, round eyes submerged in an unmaskable terror. Her trembling hand reached for the glass door's handle, pure survival instinct urging her to flee, to bolt from this trap before armored police cruisers sealed off every avenue of escape. I reached out, snatching her wrist before those wine-red manicured fingers could graze the metal. Her wrist was ice-cold, clammy with sweat in total opposition to the searing, blistering heat radiating from the asphalt outside. I squeezed lightly, just enough to transmit a measured yet undeniable restraining force, pulling her backward. "Fleeing means you are signing your own confession," I gritted out, my baritone voice flat and still as a stagnant pond, forcing her erratic heartbeat to falter. "I already told you, play him, and you are the one who survives." I let go of her hand, pivoted, and strode swiftly the rusted steel cabinet in the corner of the room. From the bottom drawer, I yanked out a specialized insulated rubber glove and a pair of non-magnetic alloy medical tweezers. Time was no longer measured in minutes, but by every approaching shriek of the sirens, growing sharper by the second. Stepping out into the blinding sunlight, the 95-degree heat immediately slapped my face with a searing blast. I dropped flat onto the curb, coated in coal dust and blackened trails of motor oil, and slithered back beneath the undercarriage of the Porsche 911 GT3 RS. The boiling asphalt baked through my rough shirt, pressing against the flesh of my back like a colossal iron. The pungent aroma of fentanyl rising from the dual exhaust pipes mingled with the stench of burning rubber, shooting straight up my nostrils and inducing a nauseating gag reflex. But my mind locked solely onto a single red dot blinking sluggishly in the crevice, the military-grade GPS unit. The architecture of this toy was profoundly venomous. If I used brute force to rip it off or sever its backup battery, the internal anti-tamper relay would instantly transmit a dead man switch signal to the DEA's servers, permanently locking its final coordinates precisely at this pawnshop. Dozens of heavily armed agents would swarm this place in under 3 minutes. I held my breath, sweat beaded on my forehead, tracking down the bridge of my nose before dripping salty tears onto the pavement. My arms snaked through the narrow gap between the boiling radiator assembly and the carbon fiber tie rod. Alloy tweezers carefully slipped into the microscopic groove between the neodymium magnet and the car's aluminum frame. With a highly surgical leverage, so slow that the muscles in my forearm cramped, I gradually severed the magnetic pull without jarring the internal circuit board. A muted click echoed faintly. The cold metallic block fell cleanly into my rubber-gloved palm. The red lead continued to blink rhythmically. The signal was still transmitting. The electronic heart of the trap was still beating. Simultaneously, an earth-shaking rumble thundered from the mouth of the alley. It wasn't police sirens. It was the heavy mechanical roar of a massive diesel engine. A super-heavy articulated scrap metal transport truck, its hull battered and rusted, caked in dried mud, was slowly turning into the lane to head toward the outer highway. The stench of rotting industrial waste and dense diesel exhaust rolled in, consuming the already stifling air. A dry smirk crept across my lips. Perfect. I shimmied out from under the Porsche, rising just as the behemoth scrap truck lumbered past the shop. Using the deafening screech of its hydraulic brakes as cover, I took a long stride to the edge of the street, swinging my arm and slamming the highly magnetic GPS block hard against the underbelly of the rusted container. A dull thud was swallowed whole by the engine's roar. That ghostly red dot clung fiercely to the oxidized steel, hiding amidst layers of dried sludge. The truck rolled on, carrying the fateful tracking device away from the street, dragging the pack of rabid DA hounds on a wild goose chase toward the colossal scrapyard in the desolate outskirts. The ghost had been relocated, but the corpse remained. I returned to the shop. Evelyn was still frozen in the corner, her labored gasps vibrating every fold of her leather jumpsuit. Ignoring her panic, I marched straight to the safe hidden behind the counter and pulled out a Panasonic Toughbook military laptop clad in thick, shock-absorbing rubber armor. Grabbing a specialized data adapter cable, I headed back outside, throwing open the driver's side door of the Porsche. The chill of the automatic climate control wafted out, carrying the scent of luxury leather and walnut dashboard trim, a regal aroma fiercely contrasting the shop's squalid backdrop. I leaned inside, plugging the cable into the OBD2 diagnostic port suspended just beneath the steering column. The laptop in my hand booted up. The black screen flickered, and then cascades of green open-source command lines began to rain down like digital precipitation. Evelyn couldn't hold back anymore. She tiptoed out of the shop, standing by the edge of the car door, watching me work. The glow from the screen cast a pallid light over her devastated face, creating a chillingly ethereal portrait. "What are you doing?" she rasped, her voice hoarse from dehydration and terror. "When the police don't see the car on the road, they'll know the tracker was removed." "Simply moving a tracker is amateur hour," I muttered, my 10 fingers dancing relentlessly across the stiff mechanical keyboard. The rhythmic clatter echoed emotionlessly, mimicking the cadence of a digital neurosurgery. "Your brother is a control freak when it comes to technology. He won't rely solely on a GPS signal. This $500,000 machine is constantly pinging the manufacturer's servers via its integrated telematics. We have to give him and the police exactly what they are dying to see. The spectacle of you plunging straight into hell." My fingers bypassed the security protocols of the Porsche's Engine Control Unit, ECU. These systems are designed to thwart hackers, but for someone who had spent countless nights in the underworld dissecting stolen machines, it was like a complex padlock that came with a master key from the inside, the OBD2 port. I breached the internal firewall, plunging directly into the crash data recorder partition. "I'm writing a demonic script for this car's brain," I said, not bothering to look up at her. "I am injecting a simulated catastrophic crash telemetry packet into the central server. The system will immediately log it and broadcast an automated SOS. My hands input the lethal variables into the command line. Current speed, 150 km/h. Engine ARP 1000. Steering angle, 45-degree loss of control. Impact sensors. Total engagement. Front and side curtain airbags deployed. Engine forced emergency cutoff due to catastrophic chassis deformation." I slammed the enter key. A deep mechanical clack echoed from the depths of the engine bay. The Porsche 911 GT3 RS, a masterpiece of German engineering, shuddered abruptly, and its menacing growl died instantly. The digital dashboard flickered, then erupted into a sea of glaring red error warnings. The vehicle's electronic nervous system had officially certified its own death warrant. In the cyberspace ether, this car had just suffered a catastrophic high-speed collision, crushed at coordinates matching the precise trajectory of the scrap truck out there. The automated distress beacon had just fired into the satellite network. A deathly silence fell over the street. Only the faint whirring hum of the laptop's cooling fan remained. "It's done." I unplugged the cable and snapped the laptop shut. "On the grid, you just perished along with 2 kilos of burning narcotics inside a crushed heap of metal wedged beneath a garbage compactor. Get inside. Your ghost has just been born." We returned to the shop, navigating through the dark showroom to enter the small back room. Here the temperature dropped significantly, courtesy of an archaic air conditioning unit rattling in the corner of the ceiling, dripping water steadily into a jagged plastic bucket. The air tasted of mildew, moss, and decaying paperwork. The sudden shift in temperature, coupled with the temporary release of nervous tension, made Evelyn's knees buckle. She stumbled toward a tattered faux leather sofa. Her red manicured hands clumsily, tremblingly gripped the metallic pull of the zipper on her racing jumpsuit. A sharp hiss rang out as the zipper was yanked down, liberating her breasts from their suffocating confinement. Evelyn opened her mouth, dragging in a deep, long gulp of air. her chest heaving like a drowning victim just breaking the water's surface. The black genuine leather had glued itself to her sweat-drenched skin. She had to exert force, grimacing in pain as she peeled the oppressive armor off her shoulders, sliding it past the sharp curve of her hips. The sound of leather detaching from flesh produced wet, haunting noises. The garment slumped to the floor, collapsing into a heap like the shed skin of a massive reptile. Stripped of the prison that had bound her, Evelyn was left wearing nothing but a soaked sports bra and panties. She curled up, wrapping her arms around her bare, goosebump-covered flesh as the cold air from the rattling AC washed over her. Without uttering a single word, I walked quietly to the utility closet, pulled out a heavy plaid flannel shirt, the kind I usually wore when overhauling engines, and tossed it to her. The oversized shirt, reeking of stiff fabric and raw motor oil, engulfed her, swallowing her scorching curves entirely, masking her lethal allure to afford her the most primal sense of safety. Evelyn hastily pushed her arms through the baggy sleeves, hurriedly fastened a few buttons, and pulled her knees to her chest on the sofa, shrinking into a tiny, shivering mass. I reached over and flicked on the cheap industrial coffee maker in the corner. The water gurgled to a boil. The cheap, over-roasted Robusta began to extract, dripping thick, pitch-black liquid into a chipped ceramic mug. The acrid, bitter stench of scorched coffee beans billowed upward, punching straight into the sinuses, a flavor harsh enough to drag anyone adrift in panic crashing back down to reality. I picked up 2 steaming mugs, walked over, placed one on the wooden table before her, and methodically lowered myself into the armchair opposite her. The tempo of everything slowed, congealing in the bitter taste melting on my tongue as I took a sip. Evelyn clutched the mug with both hands. The radiating heat brought a faint flush to her pallid cheeks. She kept her face bowed, her breath rippling across the pitch-black surface of the liquid. What will he do next? Her voice surfaced, hollow and frail. Julian, when he hears about the crash, when he sees the signal drop. He's just going to sit in his secure penthouse and wait for the lawyer to call and say I'm dead, isn't he? I shook my head slightly, placing the ceramic mug on the table. A dry clack rang out, my gaze pierced through the thin veil of steam, pinning her wavering pupils down. That is the thought process of an ordinary coward, I murmured, my tone akin to performing neurosurgery on the young billionaire's brain. But your brother isn't ordinary. He suffers from pathological narcissism. The disease of those born at the finish line, who perpetually believe they are the center of the universe, the director of a play where everyone else is just a ragged rag doll. I leaned back, crossing my arms over my chest. If Julian merely wanted you dead, he would have hired a hitman to put a bullet in your head in a dark alley. But no, he concocted a flawless script. He planted the drugs, installed a DEA tracker, hacked the car's telemetry to force you into a fatal crash in the most humiliating, disgraceful manner possible. A blood-soaked work of art designed solely to satiate his colossal ego. And do you know the absolute worst trait of a narcissistic artist? Evelyn fell silent, her eyes glued to me, awaiting the verdict. It's that they absolutely refuse to miss the exhibition of their own masterpiece, I smirked, the half-smile carving cold crow's feet into the corners of my eyes. Julian won't sit at home waiting for a dry phone call from the police. He is addicted to the dopamine of victory. He wants to see your charred wreckage with his own eyes. He is starving to stand tall and watch the police dig that brick of fentanyl out of a pile of scrap metal. He wants to fully savor the annihilation of an angel of speed so he can elevate himself to the rank of a god. I glanced at the wall clock, its second hand ticking forward at an agonizingly slow pace, the tick-tock harmonizing with the dripping AC. Right now, upon receiving the catastrophic crash alert and the loss of the GPS signal at the scrapyard, I tapped my finger lightly on the table. He is donning expensive suit, wearing his most fabricated mask of grief, and personally driving his luxury sedan straight to the junkyard. I stood up, my towering shadow eclipsing the sallow overhead light falling upon Evelyn. The stage is set. Drink the rest of that coffee, Angel. We are going to the scrapyard to see whether the narcissist's play ends in a round of applause, or the snapping of his cervical spine. The promise of snapping vertebrae still echoed, dissolving into the bitter, coffee-scented air of the dark room, before we stepped back out into the colossal incinerator of the real world. 12 noon. The sun sat at its zenith, melting everything beneath a blinding, ruthless, and unforgiving white glare. The gargantuan scrapyard on the fringes of the city materialized through the bug-splattered windshield of the beat-up Ford pickup I was piloting. The atmosphere here was not meant for breathing. It was a viscous chemical block blended from the metallic tang of thousands of tons of rusted scrap, the stench of burnt motor oil, and the sour putrefaction of industrial waste rotting under the 100-degree heat. Inside the truck's cabin, the air conditioning, broken a decade ago, only blasted waves of stifling hot air right into our faces. The torn vinyl seats stuck to my sweat-drenched back. Evelyn sat in the passenger seat. At some point she had shed my oversized flannel shirt. Her hands, devoid of any tremor, coldly gripped the metal pull of the zipper on her leather jumpsuit, slowly drawing it up in one decisive motion from her cleavage to her collar. The sharp hiss of the zipper heralded the resurrection of the Queen of Speed. The black leather once again tightly embraced her tiny waist and sweeping hips, but this time it was no longer the suffocating shell of dying prey. It was the armor of an executioner. Through the dust-caked glass, in the clearing barely 50 yards away, dozens of heavily armed DEA agents in tactical vests were sweating bullets, furiously excavating mountains of scrap metal. K-9 units panted heavily, sniffing in sheer futility around the scrap transport truck I had planted the GPS on that morning. Utter bewilderment was painted across the red, flushed faces of the cops. There was not a single shard of Porsche carbon fiber, nor a single grain of fentanyl to be found. The tracking signal died here. The crash telemetry reported here. Yet the scene was completely barren, and then the leading man of the play made his entrance. From the rutted dirt road leading into the yard, a gleaming, elongate obsidian Mercedes Maybach class glided in. The opulence, tranquility, and sheer perfection of that ultra-luxury machine created a glaring, grotesquely absurd contrast against the rusted, filthy mountains of mechanical refuse. The Maybach rolled to a halt at the police perimeter tape. The car door opened. Julian stepped out. Through the binoculars from the truck cabin, I observed every micro-movement of the young billionaire. He wore a bespoke minimalist navy blue suit, a pristine silk shirt without a single crease, his gelled hair reflecting the blinding sun. The heat smacking his face caused a faint grimace, but his legs, clad in exquisite Oxford leathers, stepped confidently onto the oil-slicked mud. He produced a silk handkerchief, casually dabbing the corner of his eye, a flawless performance of a grieving brother arriving to identify his sister's remains. Yet, buried deep beneath that veil of crocodile tears, his facial muscles were taut, struggling to suppress a triumphant, arrogant smirk. His breathing was slightly elevated. That was not the respiration of sorrow. It was the adrenaline intoxication of a narcissist standing at the absolute pinnacle of power, luxuriating in the taste of total manipulation. "There he is," Evelyn whispered beside me. Her voice was ice-cold, thick as a glacier, betraying not a single ripple of emotion, even as she stared at the flesh and blood that had just orchestrated her murder. "I see him," I replied, slowly flipping open the lid of the Panasonic Toughbook resting on the steering wheel. The antique glare screen booted up, casting a grayish-blue pallor over my sweat-soaked face. "And now we hand him the microphone he has always lusted after." Julian stood leaning against the flank of the Maybach, watching the DEA agents scrambling in confusion. Without the wreckage of the Porsche to behold, impatience began to gnaw at his ego. He pulled his smartphone from his suit jacket, swiping the screen. He needed someone to share his magnificence with, someone to validate that the empire had officially changed hands. My hands commenced typing on the keyboard. The dry, mechanical clatter harmonized with the laptop's cooling fan, which was screaming as it maxed out its processing power in the stifling cabin. This machine of mine was rigged with a custom software-defined radio SDR amplifier antenna explicitly built to hunt down poorly encrypted frequencies. The infotainment systems on ultra-luxury vehicles like the Maybach are perpetually a double-edged sword. They are engineered to connect to everything: Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, satellite networks, turning the car into a technological fortress. But the more nodes of connection there are, the wider the telecommunication vulnerabilities gape. Julian's phone was automatically pairing via Bluetooth to the car's premium Burmester surround sound system. He didn't hold the phone to his ear. He activated the speakerphone routed through the Maybach system so he could talk while standing with his arms crossed, basking in his victory. I pierced the vehicle's firewall in exactly 45 seconds. I didn't hack the steering or the engine. I seized control of only one node, the audio control module. I isolated the signal feed from the ambient microphone hidden in the Maybach's headliner. Through my laptop speakers, the rustle of static interference flared, and then Julian's voice came through crystal clear, deep, resonant, echoing with absolute, supreme arrogance. He was calling the family's lead attorney. "Yes, Mr. Davis, that's right, I'm at the scene." "It's horrific, I mean an absolute tragedy." Julian's voice dripped with faux sympathy as he let out a highly theatrical sigh. Then he lowered his pitch, the mockery beginning to bleed through his teeth. "No, the police haven't recovered the body yet. But you know how it is, that stupid bitch was driving the Porsche at 150 kilometers an hour. The DEA said the signal vanished right here at the compactor. She must have panicked so badly she drove the car and herself straight into the grinder." "You ask why she panicked?" Julian chuckled. A dark, filthy, guttural laugh of pure scum masquerading as the elite. "Because I stuffed 2 kilos of pure fentanyl into her exhaust pipes this morning, sir. I even attached a tracker dialing straight to the DEA. She's a speed whore, but far too ignorant to realize who actually holds the steering wheel of her life. Trigger the morality clause in the will immediately. The old man is going to flatline in a few days, and I want every document transferring the trust fund ready on my desk by tomorrow morning." In the sweltering truck cabin, Evelyn clamped her eyes shut. Her hands, sheathed in leather gloves, clenched into fists so tight the knuckles audibly cracked against one another. The betrayal, now verified by raw, merciless audio, slashed apart whatever microscopic shred of familial bond remained. "Are you ready?" I asked, my index finger hovering over the enter key. "Kill him." Evelyn opened her eyes, her gaze now as razor-sharp as a surgical scalpel fresh out of an antiseptic bath. I hit the key. An audio routing command sequence, compressed into a radio wave packet, shot straight into the ether. I wasn't merely eavesdropping. I had utilized my SDR equipment to scan the low-frequency VHF tactical bands the DEA agents on site were using for internal comms. What unfolded next transpired at an agonizingly slow, grotesque pace. Like a slow-motion film suffering from dropped frames, approximately 30 DEA agents digging through the scrap heaps abruptly froze. Almost in perfect unison, they raised their hands to press their earpieces deeper into their ears, or bowed their heads toward the shoulder-mounted radios on their tactical vests. Their internal communication network had just been overridden. Instead of dry logistical reports, a crystal-clear broadcast, dripping with the arrogant timbre of the upper echelon, blasted straight into the eardrums of 30 federal officers. "Because I stuffed 2 kilos of pure fentanyl into her exhaust pipes this morning. I even attached a tracker dialing straight to the DEA." Julian's confession played back on an endless loop I had established, echoing over and over from the radios broadcasting on loudspeaker. Amidst the dead silence of the scrapyard, save for the hot wind whistling through rusted iron, the billionaire's voice rang out with terrifying clarity. Julian, standing beside the Maybach, having just pocketed his phone, registered the atmospheric shift. He saw dozens of pairs of eyes belonging to heavily armed agents slowly turn, locking their sights onto him. The brilliant sun beat down on the narcissist's face, which was rapidly draining of all color. His trademark half-smirk froze solid. Absolute paralyzing panic crashed down like a hurricane tearing through his mind. Instinctively, he reached up to adjust his tie in a defensive gesture, but it was far too late. "Dia, hands on your head, get down on the ground right now." The bellowing commands ripped the silence to shreds. The thundering stampede of boots on the gravel. The chilling, mechanical clack of dozens of M4 assault rifles, Glock 19 sidearms chambering rounds in unison, their muzzles aimed squarely at the expensive Navy suit. Julian's arrogance shattered into a million pieces. He staggered backward, his hip slamming into the hood of the Maybach. His knees buckled involuntarily as 3 massive agents tackled him. A tremendous kinetic force slammed him down. His face was violently pinned against the black, glossy metal of the luxury sedan, which had been baking under 100-degree heat. A stifled shriek of pure, scalding agony erupted from his throat, mixing with the sickening scent of searing flesh and hair gel burning against the metal. The icy steel of the handcuffs bit into his wrists with a piercing snap. A life sentence had just been sealed and branded right onto his back. At that moment, the rusted door of the pickup truck popped open, letting out a slow, agonizing groan. Evelyn stepped out. Her high-collared leather boots struck the gravel with the majestic rhythm of a queen who had just executed a traitor. The blinding sunlight was no longer an oppressive force. It illuminated the pitch-black racing suit clinging tightly to her lethal curves, transforming her into an entity of terrifying dark authority. She did not rush. She walked deliberately toward the police perimeter, where her brother was pinned down, his face pressed to the smoking hood, his eyes rolled back in agony and sheer terror. Julian saw his sister, a phantom of flesh and blood, gorgeous and glacial, stepping out from the mirage of the death he himself had orchestrated. His eyes bulged so wide the crimson veins stood out starkly. His throat emitted senseless, guttural grunts like an animal being slaughtered. He realized he was not the director of this play. He was merely a foolish marionette led by the nose straight to the guillotine. Evelyn stopped 6 feet away from him. She didn't utter a single syllable. There was no barrage of insults, no tears of resentment, no dramatic slap across the face. She simply stood there, arms crossed over her chest, staring directly into his dilated pupils with a gaze of utter, exhausted pity, devoid of all emotion, as cold as looking at a pile of scrap metal devoid of any recycling value. A gaze that utterly crushed whatever fragments of a soul the enemy had left. She turned on her heel, her rhythm fluid and decisive, leaving behind the ruins of a man who had just forfeited his freedom, his honor, and a colossal fortune. She opened the passenger door of the battered pickup, climbed in, and pulled the door shut. I threw the gear shift. The ancient truck shuddered, belching a thick cloud of black smoke before lumbering forward, merging into the rushing traffic of the highway, erasing every trace of the two phantoms who had just manipulated the entire board. People often preach that blood is thicker than water. Tragically, when faced with a multi-million-dollar will, that blood reeks fouler than any subterranean sewer running beneath this city. That brother didn't walk into a prison cell because he lacked intelligence. He lost because his narcissistic ego was simply too colossal. He was addicted to the delusion that he was a god with the right to dispense death and manipulate the fates of the weak. And it was that pathological craving to witness his own cruel masterpiece come to life that automatically slipped the noose around his neck. The rules of revenge have never played favorites. The deeper the trap you set, the wider the grave you dig for yourself. If it were you, standing before someone sharing your blood who had just plotted to throw you into a life sentence to steal everything, would you choose to quietly disarm the trap and walk away in humiliation, or would you crush them down to the absolute bottom of the muck, exactly as we did? Tell me your choice down in the comments. I am genuinely curious to know exactly where your moral boundaries lie when you are pushed to the absolute edge. If you savor this suffocating atmosphere, leave a like and subscribe. The neon sign of my pawn shop is always lit, waiting for the next shattered fragments of this world. See you in the next transaction. Good night.